from the air in Genoa. Clearly, President Bush, his spokesperson Ari Fleischer, and his national security advisor Condi Rice were more than aware of the threat of planes as weapons, but the news media appeared to miss the lead.
You have information about simultaneous hijackings,
no specific threat,
planes being used as weapons.
I don't think anybody could have predicted
Specific targets, including mentions of Pentagon, World Trade Center.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Dr. Rice, would you please rise and raise your right hand? You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
In April 2004, public pressure finally forced the White House to allow Dr. Rice to testify before the 9/11 Commission to answer questions about the PDB and the nature of warnings given the administration.
the threat reporting that we received in the spring and summer of 2001 was not specific as to time, nor place, nor manner of attack. Almost all of the reports focused on al-Qaeda activities outside the United States.
This sat in stark contrast to the warnings well documented in Thompson's timeline.
What the August 6th PDB said, and perhaps I should read it to you.
We would be happy to have it declassified in full.
When she was testifying, one Ben Venice was really trying to get into the nitty-gritty.
Did you tell the President at any time prior to August 6th of the existence of al-Qaeda cells in the United States?
First, let me just make certain.
If you could just answer that question,
first,
because I only have a very limited...
I understand, Commissioner, but it's
Did you tell
important,
the
important that I also address...
It wasn't like a trial. You couldn't grill these people till you got the answer.
I really don't remember, Commissioner, whether I discussed this with the President.
Just let me move on, if I may.
There were no specifics. And
what about August 6th? What did August 6th memo say? And then she would start going off.
It was historical information based on old reporting. There was no new threat information, and it did not, in fact, warn of any coming attacks inside the United States.
And what was the title of the memo?
I believe the title was Bin Laden Determined to Attack Inside the United States. Now, the PDB...
2 weeks later, the White House finally declassified the PDB.
There's lots of examples where it's a domestic threat. Bin Laden told followers he wanted to retaliate in Washington. You know, Bin Laden was planning to exploit the operatives' access to the U.S. to mount a terrorist strike. Abu Zubaydah was planning his own U.S. attack. Less FBI information since that time indicates patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings in New York. That's present tense and domestic.
Ari Fleischer came out right after September 11th and said there were no warnings. I watched him tell me there were no warnings, okay? I want to know why nobody has gone back and said, what did he mean?
Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11.
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, you know, it's time for politics, and it's an absurd insinuation.
The press has reported this one and that one, but they haven't really put it all together and said, God, how many different warnings did you get? How many different ways was this information coming at you? And why wasn't anything done about all these warnings?
Why is the Attorney General of the United States doing all his air travel by specially chartered jet?
The Justice Department cited what it called a threat assessment by the FBI and said Ashcroft has been advised to travel only by private jet for the remainder of his term.
And on the night before the attacks, the president may have slept more soundly, knowing surface-to-air missiles were placed on the roof of the Sarasota, Florida resort where he was staying. Not a typical security procedure at the time. That same night, quote, a particularly urgent warning may have been received, causing some top Pentagon brass to cancel their scheduled flights the morning of 9/11. Why that same information was not available to the 266 people who died aboard the 4 hijacked aircraft may become a hot topic on the Hill. It never did.
We took an oath not to talk about during the campaign, I think correctly so, to increase the capacity of that commission's report to be heard by the People's Congress. Now it's beyond the campaign, so the promise I had to keep this out of the campaign is over. So, Mr. President, you knew they were in the United States. You were warned by the CIA. You knew in July they were inside the United States. You were told again by briefing officers in August that it was a dire threat. Didn't do anything to harden our border security, didn't do anything to harden airport security, didn't do anything to engage local law enforcement, didn't do anything to round up INS and consular offices and say we have to shut this down, and didn't warn the American people. What did you do? Nothing, so far as we could see.
The government first said there were no warnings. There were. Then the White House insisted the warnings were not specific as to where, when, or how. The 9/11 families and the timeline connected the dots where the media didn't. There were many warnings. Most were detailed, some were urgent, and yet little or no defensive action was taken by responsible officials, except for their own personal protection.
The public was better informed in the summer of 2001. Lives would have been saved. Maybe the attacks wouldn't have been prevented. Lives would have been saved. My husband was in Tower 2. If he knew that it was a terrorist attack, he wouldn't have stayed in the building.
When they were told that the building was secure and to stay at their desk, maybe they would have left. Maybe, those who thought that the first attack was an errant plane would have thought differently and responded differently. But again, we weren't given the information to make any of these decisions for ourselves.
Even as the first tower burned on every channel that morning, no one on the federal level who had received warnings all summer called New York to order an evacuation of Tower 2. No one ordered fighters to perform any timely defensive action against the remaining hijacked planes. No one responded adequately to the crisis.
It has been said that the intelligence agencies have to be right 100% of the time, and the terrorists only have to get lucky once. This explanation for the devastating attacks of September 11th, simple on its face, is wrong in its value. Because the 9/11 terrorists were not just lucky once. They were lucky over and over again. When you have this repeated pattern of broken protocols, broken laws, broken communication, one cannot still call it luck. If at some point we don't look to hold the individuals accountable for not doing their jobs properly, then how can we ever expect for terrorists to not get lucky again?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. And tonight, the United States of America makes the following demands on the Taliban. Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of al-Qaeda who hide in your land. The Taliban must act and act immediately. They will hand over the terrorists, or they will share in their fate.
We have a live picture that we're showing from Kabul.
American ground forces at this hour are penetrating